Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of the Leaders in Value Chain podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamariu, and very happy to have with us today Keith Svendsen, who is the CEO of APM Terminals. So APM Terminals, 20,000 people, operates 75 ports and terminals in 40 countries, one of the largest port operators in the world, one of those companies that basically keep the global trade flowing and running. And I'm very happy to have Keith with us today to tell us a little bit more about the business, about himself, and about how he sees things. So maybe to set the scene, Keith grew up himself close to one of the big Danish ports. I hope I'll pronounce it correctly, is Esbjerg, and joined Maersk as a cadet at the age of 16. So Keith, I hope I said it correctly, and what a career.
Thank you, Radu, and thank you for having me on the podcast. And I think your Danish is off to a good start.
I'm practicing. The more I deal with Maersk and with with my Danish friends, I hope I'll get better. But yes, you basically spent close to 30 plus years, within the Maersk Group. Now CEO of APM Terminals. I'd love to start by asking you, when you look back all the way from 16 to where you are now, what was some of the key inflection points? Some of those moments of time in your career where you look back and say, wow, this really made a difference for me?
Yeah, and thank you for that question. It's as you know, when you look back, everything makes sense. So when I reflect on my own journey, so I grew up, as you said, in this port city on the Danish west coast that was filled with shipping, offshore, fishing, and general cargo. And I think the first inflection point in hindsight that I got was I got lucky with my parents and my family. So I come out of this family where on one side they were commercial fishermen and owned a small fleet of ships, and on the other side they were in trucking companies. So I grew up in an environment where nobody was employed, so everybody was self-employed. So the first inflection point in my life ended up with two very important fundamental beliefs about life. Understanding business from an owner's perspective, because that was the only thing I knew. And then I would say a deep love for the sea, just by observation and being part of it from a young age. So when I look back, I think the love to the sea and the maritime world and trade is what has kept me in this fantastic industry for the last 3 decades. And I think my approach to business has been shaped more than anything about my upbringing in a family-based environment where people are owning their own businesses.
No, absolutely. And now specifically ports, most of us, whether we actually work in supply chain, we have a lot of people listening to this podcast, global supply chains, global operations, global value chains. But typically we don't really think ports, airports, infrastructure. We tend to kind of take it for granted. On one side, perhaps we don't fully grasp the importance of it. On the other side, also the impact of a good port towards a community, a country, and the overall development of an area. So I wanted to start also there. I know you have one or two examples of where APM went and developed a port and the whole community flourished. So I'd love to perhaps share some of these stories, because I think it gets the right focus on why ports are so key.
Yeah, I'm of course very biased about how great ports are, or transport and shipping and logistics in general. But I think maybe if you zoom out and everybody understands how important it is to a country or city when you have a great airport, right? It's easy to travel somewhere. People come to your location, and it just facilitates movement of people and connections and trade and business and relationships. And ports are doing the same thing for trade. Given that over 90% of everything we trade with each other is moved by sea, it is really impossible to move all this cargo without the ports of the world. As globalization really accelerated the last 30 plus years, and ships both grew in size and numbers, there's been this fantastic growth in requirements to the ports of the world. And at that intersection is where APM Terminals is working in many countries of the world. So the first thing about ports that is exciting is that a country needs it for its economy. It needs it for its exports, its imports, to make sure that the economy is efficient. And then typically countries will then invite the countries or companies like ours to compete for the privilege to run their ports. And if I make it specific, the last port we finished was in Costa Rica on the Caribbean side in a location called Moín. This is the largest fruit export port in the world. And before the port, all the fruit was being moved in traditional general cargo refrigerated vessels, and it's been going like this for years and years and years. And the government decided to containerize and modernize their economy and build this port, which we were lucky enough to win. And the impact when you do these social economic studies of what the impact is before and after. So before we had traditional port, now we have modern port. It's actually the most efficient port in the entire Latin South America range now. It's 5 years old. And what the experts are saying is, so it generates a lower cost for trade as a percentage of GDP, which is what the economists are looking at. So you are making the country more efficient.
Yeah.
But for the people, you are creating jobs, and you're creating better jobs because in this case, safety is better. You're bringing in a company like ourselves who operate at international and high standards, so the jobs become better. And then there's all these secondary and tertiary effects of, the CSR efforts and ESG efforts that we put back into the country. So, there's no carbon in this port. There's schools that's being funded. There's a nursery for turtles there that used to live on the beach. There's economic growth in that city, which has been deprived for a long time. And the economist estimates that for Costa Rica, this could mean well over 100,000 jobs in the economy just at this point. And in the lifetime of the port, it could really make a meaningful difference. So I think it's a great story where, because you build infrastructure that works well, the cost of transport is going down to a point that it has an impact on GDP. On people, it gives better jobs. It lifts the standard for skills in society. It generates more economic growth in the entire ecosystem. And I think it also lifts the bars for what good looks like. So maybe other people have something to aspire to in a place where that has not been possible before. And when you put it all together, it really makes a positive impact on that location. And that's true for many, many locations around the world. So ports is really an enabler for trade and improving lives for people around them.
And of course, there's many challenges in operating a global business within ports. You as the global CEO, I wanted to also ask you, you have this tension on the one side, the more automated, the more efficient a port is, the better it is. On the other side, there's many places in the world, there's unions, there's a shortage of workers. There's many countries in this world where people perhaps don't necessarily want to work in a port type of an environment. How are you thinking about this? How are you kind of planning to address some of these challenges?
So I think it starts with really appreciating that since humanity invented the wheel, technology has been driving us forward as a species, you could say, right? So we continue to find ways to do things more efficient. And for the infrastructure, in this case, the ports to work, there is this I would say, ongoing need to find a way to operate these assets more and more efficient every day and to capture the growth in trade. Before it becomes about automation for us, Radu, right? We have a belief in APM Terminals that it's the women and men of our company that is really, it's their hands that moves world trade. So we have this approach to our operation that's based on lean, which is really a people-based system for how you make things safer, higher quality, lower cost, and better delivery to the customers and things. And automation plays into that equation. And I think, as you rightfully said, right? So automation really, depending on where you are in the world, it can be an opportunity to improve safety. Ports are a dangerous place to be, and separating human beings from trucks and cranes has proven to be the number one thing we can do to really reduce accidents. So that's that is important. And then we have certain parts of the world where, in China, where we have a joint venture in Qingdao, in Japan, it is very clear that people in these countries do not want to work in the ports. And maybe even in the case of Japan, with a shrinking population, there will be a date very soon where if we don't automate the work, it's difficult to see how we will actually keep the trade flowing. And then in other parts of the world, we need to create jobs, because that's really what matters. So automation lives in that spectrum. And what we believe in, and what I think is what's going to happen, is that we will use automation together with humans for as long as we operate. And we will, everywhere where we can make it safer, we will do that, because that's our number one commitment to the teams out there. And then, depending on where we are in the world and how the needs of that particular location is, there will either be more or less automation. But I think it's probably fair to say that 20 years from now, it is difficult to imagine that in many parts of the world that we have the luxury of the access to people who wants to work in certain jobs in our industry, and we need to find some solutions to how to deal with that if that is indeed the case. So in Rotterdam, for instance, we have automated some of the horizontal transport within the ports. In many places, we have automated the gates into the terminals, exactly as it is on a highway. When we drive on, we get a ticket and we move on. So there's probably good solutions to certain things. And then other places, through lean, we believe that humans is going to continue to be able to do a better job than the machines for as long as we can see.
And on the point of attracting talent, and again, I'm passionate about this business. I grew I grew to be passionate because I my background wasn't in logistics, wasn't in trade, wasn't in supply chain. But over the course of the last 10-15 years, I've come to appreciate it a lot. However, a lot of people coming out of universities are not perhaps dreaming of becoming, a logistician or an expert in ports and so on. So I guess one question, I'm sure this is something that you as the CEO and ensuring the long-term development of APM Terminals think a lot, is how do you attract this young, talented people to the industry and to make a difference?
Yeah, this is something I think a lot about, and given what I just said, is that we believe that the superpower we have is my colleagues out in the terminals. Our entire approach to our business hinges on the fact that we have talented, committed, and engaged colleagues out in every port and in the offices we're in. I think what is really important with the entire transport industry, but let me just talk for port here, is that we really have to tell the story and educate and show people what it is that we do. There's this beautiful quote from the late French writer Antoine Saint-Exupéry, who says, "If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood, and don't assign them to tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea." And I think if you think about that statement, then and you think about what it is that the ports do, transforming communities. For there is a fantastic human dimension to our business in terms of teams and leadership for the people who wants to go that direction. You really get to do something with other people, and then you get to deal with complexity, which a lot of talented people enjoys. So across supply chain, shipping, and ports, one of the things that is truly exciting about this is the complexity of the problem solving. And I have seen now for many years that when we show people these things come together, then they really get excited about it. And then when people get in, they tend to stay, which is rewarding. But it's not never something we can take for granted. And in APM Terminals and in Maersk in general, we're spending a lot of resources on incentivizing young people to come and talk with us, and then spend a lot of resources and on actually educating, showing, giving them the opportunities. And I think so far we've been able to be successful with this, but it's not something we will take for granted ever. So I hope that the coming generations are also gonna get hooked on global transportation and ports and the wonderful things that we actually are doing for the world and the impact it actually has. One thing we've been working on for a while, which I personally are very committed and motivated by, but I can see is important for talent, is that we really have this greatest challenge on cutting emissions and combating global warming, and whilst increasing trade, which is the key driver of global prosperity. So given that logistics stands for 11% of total emissions, and the terminals and the ports are a very small part of that, but they are part of the challenge. I really see all over the world that the talent that has joined us the last 5 years, this is a major point for them, that they want us to solve some of these bigger problems. And I think that fits very well into the overall Maersk commitment. And we are working very hard to drive down our pollution footprint, our emissions, all the negativity that is around this argument. We are part of the solution now. And I can see that creates a lot of energy and commitment, which is super rewarding to see.
And I remember it was about 6 years ago, I was interviewing a CEO, actually also part of Maersk. And I told him, look, logistics is not really seen as sexy. What can we do? And then his reply basically stopped me in my tracks. And I still remember the moment. It's been a while ago, but I remember it. He said, "What do you mean it's not sexy, Radu? It is very sexy. Tell you why. We are basically enabling trade, but beyond these big words, I basically know that through the work we do, we help people in Costa Rica, in Latin America, sell bananas, or in Philippines, sell bananas in markets where they would not have access to, make money to support their families. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen the benefits that brings them. And even if it's a very simple example with bananas, of course, global trade reflects everything that we trade in this world, but it's a huge impact, Radu. And I do believe that my job is incredibly important. And the energy with which he said it, the passion, it was just, for me, it was like, wow. So I'm saying this because also I know that you, Keith, you're active also on social media. There's quite a few of these things that matter a lot, that it becomes personal, because ultimately people don't join a company, they don't join they join other people, right? I mean, yes, they join the purpose, they join a vision, they of course they want to have some meaning, but ultimately it's driven by people to people. And I think this type of stories, and I also loved your example with Costa Rica, it's what will attract more young talent into the industry.
I think that's spot on, I also think that there is actually, as there always has been and always will be, big challenges that we need to overcome and solve. At the moment, when we started to focus, for instance, on the carbon issue, right? I mean, the teams, and a lot of them young, talented people, found a way to reduce our, black electricity with 40% within 12 months, right? 40% within 12 months. And they now have made a plan for how we can reduce it to 70% our footprint by the end of the decade. And at the same time, they are helping locally with all kinds of things, ranging from removing plastic from the oceans to. So I see this movement of commitment that is put into problem solving, and it's very tangible because it's right in front of your eyes. And with the ports, it is very hard to maybe understand if you have never been in one. But if you come to a traditional not working port, it kind of, you feel it right away, right? I mean, doesn't feel safe. You can see it's not efficient. You understand that there's a cost to this that somebody has to pay. It's maybe the people don't look. You can see in their eyes that they are not engaged. And then you can see the same place a while after, where you have motivated people, where their eyes light up. You can see the efficiency and feel that it's working, and you can understand at so many different levels the positive impact that it does. And I think when you have felt that, then there's no going back. So I think our job is to show, it is to engage, it is really to invite people to become part of solving some of these very real challenges and making good while doing it. And luckily, there's a lot of talented people from all over the world that find this interesting. And for me, that's a privilege to be part of such a group.
So I gotta ask you. So let's make it personal. For you, Keith, when you think, as the CEO, and you go in all these places, 75 ports, there's a lot here. I hope you don't need to go to each and every one of them every year. Then you don't have enough days even. But what makes you most proud, right? As the leader of the organization, when you walk into a port, into an office, into an APM terminals setup, what makes you most proud?
So for me, this is an easy answer, right? What I'm most proud of is my colleagues. I call them my teammates, but I see myself as a chief energy officer, if you could, being responsible for directing, challenging, and rewarding all these great people to do the right things every day. And no matter how good our strategies are, or how great the technologies we try to come up with, it goes to say for me that unless our people really commit their heartfelt energy behind our purpose and deliver this extraordinary experience for each other and the customers every day, our role in the world is not very exciting. And what I am most happy about, and what gives me most energy, is actually to visit my colleagues and experience that. And I continue to be impressed with the mountains they move and the problems they solve, and how they progress us as a community around these ports. And that is at the heart of our belief on how we operate in company, right? So as I mentioned earlier, technology is a tool, people is what powers global supply chains, and it's for sure what powers APM Terminals.
And I like to ask this because you've obviously you have an extremely successful career, CEO of a large global company. If you were to give some pieces of advice to younger professionals or mid-stage professionals in their careers, what helped you most be successful, what would that advice be?
I think there's three things that is really important. The first is to stay curious or continue to learn. I know a lot of successful people, and what I have learned over the years is that it's really important to continue to learn and educate oneself. This is a lifelong journey, not something we finish with after university or or whatever education we're coming from. And personally, I listen and read a lot. That's the channels that works best for me to get inspiration. And I try to really get inspiration from people outside my domain and industry, and learn from the very best in the world. And then I have never met a wise person who is not curious and doesn't ask a lot of questions. So my first advice to those who are on the way up is to really stay curious and continue to learn. The second thing is that people need to raise their hand and ask. I think it's really important that people ask for the responsibilities and to take ownership for the outcomes. Every good and exciting job, including the CEO jobs, really go to people who take responsibility for outcomes and deliver on them. So my advice would be to lean in, take the challenges, and take responsibility. And then the final one is that I don't think there's any getting around commitment and hard work. And it requires discipline, diligence, effort, and to get things done. And I don't know anybody who has gotten to an exciting outcome in jobs, and there's many of them, unless they have put in a lot of effort into it. So my advice would be to really spend time on something people have passion for, because if not, it's not possible to outwork the average. And finally, I would say it's important to have fun and be around people that you like and respect, because that's one of life's big gifts. And we don't have to take things too seriously all the time. So stay curious, raise your hand, and there's no getting around hard work.
Love the three things. And yeah, I myself, I will admit that for a long time I looked for some sort of a shortcut to success. Especially when I was a bit younger. Now I'm not that I'm necessarily old now, but maybe with enough punches in my face, I've learned that perhaps there is no shortcut. and perhaps hard work, consistent over a long period of time, doing again things that you're passionate of, and surrounding yourself with people that push you to be better, that tends to work fairly well, but it's not necessarily short.
It's not short, and it's difficult to understand this when you're young. Obviously, at least it was not completely clear to me, at least. But I had this love for the sea and transportation, and so and I had a lot of passion for that, and I think that kind of drove me ahead. And everybody I know who has done something interesting, and this is from business to government to non-profit to sports, is somebody they like what they do. I really, they like the people they're around, and I think this is really important. And the most developing thing we can do is to surround ourselves with people who are good and hopefully better than ourselves, that we can learn from. So I would say pick carefully. And one of the gifts we have in APM Maersk is that I have a lot of talented colleagues, which really continues to push me, and is one of the things I appreciate the most about our company.
Love it. Well, Keith, been a pleasure. Thanks a lot for joining us today, and wishing you a super successful and fun 2024.
Thank you very much, Radu. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with you today.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to go to www.elcotglobal.com and click the podcast button for all the show notes of the interview. Also, subscribe to our mailing list to get our latest updates first. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes, Spotify, or Stitcher, we would appreciate a kind review. 5-star works best to keep us going and our production team happy. And of course, share it with your friends. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me. And if you have any suggestions on what to do and who to invite next, don't hesitate to drop me a note. And if you're looking to hire top executives in supply chain or transform your business, of course, contact us as well to find out how we can help.